Harper Audio presents Mutant Message Down Under, written and read by Marlo Morgan. This is a work told as fiction, but inspired by my actual experience in Australia. It probably could have taken place in Africa, or South America, or anywhere where the true meaning of civilization is still alive. It's for the listener to receive his or her own message from my story. It seems there should have been some warning, but I felt none. Events were already in motion. The group of predators sat miles away, awaiting their prey. The luggage I had unpacked 1 hour before would tomorrow be tagged unclaimed and stay in storage month after month. I was to become merely one more American to disappear in a foreign country. It was a sweltering October morning. I stood looking down the drive of the Australian five-star hotel for an unknown courier. Contrary to receiving a warning, my heart was literally singing. I felt so good, so excited, so successful and prepared. Inwardly, I sensed today is my day. A topless Jeep pulled in to the circular entrance. I remember hearing the tires hiss on the steaming pavement. The Jeep stopped, and the driver, a 30-year-old Aboriginal, looked my way. "Come on," his black hand beckoned. He was looking for a blonde American. I was expecting to be escorted to an Aboriginal tribal meeting. Under the censoring blue eyes and disapproving manner of the uniformed Aussie doorman, we mentally agreed to the match. Even before I made the awkward struggle of high heels into the all-terrain vehicle, it was obvious I was overdressed. The young man to my right wore shorts, a dingy white T-shirt, and sockless tennis shoes. I had assumed when they arranged transportation for the meeting, it would be a normal automobile, perhaps a Holden, the pride of Australia's car manufacturers. I never dreamed he would arrive in something wide open. Well, I'd rather be overdressed than underdressed to attend a meeting. My award banquet. I introduced myself. He merely nodded and acted as if he were already certain of who I was. The doorman frowned at us as we propelled past him. We drove through the streets of the coastal city, past rows of veranda-fronted homes, milk bar snack shops, and grassless cement parks. I clutched the door handle as we circled a roundabout where 6 directions merged. When we exited, our new heading put the sun at my back, and already the newly acquired peach-colored business suit and matching silk blouse were becoming uncomfortably warm. I guessed the building was across town, but I was wrong. We entered the main highway running parallel to the sea. This meeting was apparently out of town, further from the hotel than I anticipated. I removed my jacket, thinking how foolish it was not to have asked more questions. At least I had a brush in my purse, and my shoulder-length bleached hair was pinned up in a fashionable braid. My curiosity had not subsided from the moment I received the initial phone call, although when it came I couldn't say I was truly surprised. After all, I had received other civic recognitions, and this project had been a major success. Working with urban-dwelling half-caste Aboriginal adults who had openly displayed suicidal attitudes, and accomplishing for them a sense of purpose and financial success was bound to be noticed sooner or later. I was surprised. The tribe issuing the summons lived 2,000 miles away, on the opposite coast of the continent, but I knew very little about any of the Aboriginal nations except the idle comments I heard occasionally. I didn't know if they were a close-knit race or if, like American Indians, vast differences, including different languages, were common. What I really wondered about was what I would receive, another wooden engraved plaque to be sent back for storage in Kansas City, or perhaps simply a bouquet of flowers. And what in the world a native council would serve for our meal. This was going to be a wonderfully unique experience, and I was looking forward to a memorable day. The purse I carried, purchased for today, held a 35mm camera and a small tape recorder. They hadn't said anything about microphones or spotlights or my giving a speech, but I was prepared anyway. A truck convoy passed us, heading in the opposite direction. They came bolting out of fuzzy heat waves straight down the center of the pavement. I was shaken when the driver jerked the steering wheel and we left the highway, heading down a rugged dirt road, followed for miles by a fog of red dust. Somewhere, the two well-worn ruts disappeared, and I became aware there was no longer a road in front of us. We were zigzagging around bushes and jumping over the serrated, sandy desert. I tried to make conversation several times, but the noise of the open vehicle, the brush from the underside of the chassis, and the movement of my body up and down made it impossible. It was necessary to hold my jaws tightly together to keep from biting my tongue. My head bounced as if my body were a child's cloth doll, and I was getting hotter and hotter. My pantyhose felt like they were melted on my feet, but I was afraid to remove a shoe for fear it would bounce out into the expanse of copper-colored flatness surrounding us. I had no faith the mute driver would stop. Every time my sunglasses became filmed over, I wiped them off with the hem of my slip. The movements of my arm let open a floodgate to a river of perspiration, and I could feel my makeup dissolve, and pictured the rosy tinge once painted on my cheeks streaking down as a red trail down my neck. They would have to allow me 20 minutes to get myself back in order before the presentation. I would insist on it. I studied my watch. 2 hours had passed since entering the desert. I was hotter and more uncomfortable than I can remember feeling in years. The driver remained silent, except for an occasional hum. It suddenly dawned on me he had not introduced himself. Maybe I wasn't in the correct vehicle, but that was silly, and I couldn't get out of it. He certainly seemed confident about me as a passenger. 4 hours later, we pulled up to a corrugated tin structure. A small smoldering fire burned outside, and 2 Aborigine ladies stood up as we approached. They were both middle-aged, short, scantily clad, wearing warm smiles of welcome. One wore a headband, made her thick curly black hair escape at strange angles. They both appeared slim and athletic, with round, full faces, holding bright brown eyes. And as I descended from the Jeep, my chauffeur said, "By the way, I'm the only one who speaks English. I will be your interpreter, your friend." Great, I thought. I've spent $700 on airfare, hotel room, and new clothes for this introduction to native Australians, and now I find out they can't even speak English, let alone recognize current fashions. The women spoke in blunt foreign sounds. It didn't even sound like sentences, only single words. My interpreter turned to me and explained that permission to attend the meeting required that I first be cleansed. I didn't understand what he meant. It was true. I was covered with several layers of dust and I was hot from the ride, but that didn't seem to be his meaning. He handed me a piece of cloth, which I opened to discover had the appearance of a wraparound rag. I was told I needed to remove my clothing and put it on. "What?" I asked, unbelieving. "Are you serious?" He sternly repeated the instructions. I looked around for a place to change. There was none. What could I do? I had come too far and endured too much discomfort at this point to decline. The young man walked away. Oh, what the heck. It'll be cooler with these clothes, I thought. So as discreetly as possible, I removed my soiled new clothing, folded it neatly into a pile, and I donned the native attire. I stacked my things on a nearby boulder, which only moments before had served as a stool for the waiting women. I felt silly in this colorless rag and regretted investing in the new making a good impression clothing. The young man reappeared. He too had changed clothing. He stood before me almost naked, having only a cloth wrapped around in swimming trunk fashion and barefoot, as were the women at the fire. He issued further instructions to remove everything, shoes, hose, undergarments, and all my jewelry, even the bobby pins holding my hair. My curiosity was slowly fading, Apprehension was taking over, but I did as told. A blanket of thick gray smoke rose from the smoldering coals as fresh green brush was added. The headbanded woman took what appeared to be the wing of a large black hawk and opened it to form a fan. She flapped it in front of me from face to feet. The smoke swirled, stifling my breath. Finally, I was told I had been cleansed and received permission to enter the metal shed. As the bronze male escort walked with me around to the entrance, I saw the headbanded woman pick up my entire stack of belongings. She held it up over the flames. She looked at me and smiled, and as our eyes acknowledged one another, she released the treasures in her hand. Everything I owned went into the fire. For a moment, my heart was numb, and I took a very deep sigh. I don't know why I didn't shout a protest and immediately run to retrieve everything, but I didn't. The woman's facial expression indicated that her actions weren't malicious. It was done in a manner that one might offer a stranger some unique sign of hospitality. She's just ignorant, I thought. She doesn't understand about credit cards and important papers. I was grateful I had left my airline ticket at the hotel. I knew I had other clothes there, too, and somehow I would deal with walking through the lobby dressed in this garb when the time came. I remember thinking to myself, "Hey, Marlowe, you're a flexible person. This isn't worth getting an ulcer over." But I did make a mental note to dig one of the rings from the ashes later. Hopefully the fire would die down and cool off before our return jeep ride back to the city. But that was not to be. We entered a 3-sided roofed shed. There was no actual door or need for windows. It was simply constructed for the purpose of shade, or perhaps as a haven for sheep. Inside, the heat was intensified by another fire encircled in stone. There were no signs of it providing for human needs. No chairs, no flooring, no fan. It was without electricity. The entire place was rippling tin held together precariously by worn and rotting lumber. My eyes adjusted quickly from the glare that I had been experiencing the last 4 hours to the darker hue of the shade and smoke. Adult Aboriginal people were standing or sitting on the sand. The males wore colorful, ornate headbands and had feathers attached to their upper arms and around their ankles. They wore the same type of wrap as the driver. He was unpainted, but the others had designs painted on their faces and along their arms and legs. They had used white to make dots and stripes and elaborate patterns. Drawings of lizards adorned their arms, while snakes, kangaroos, and birds appeared upon their legs and backs. The women were less festive. They appeared to be about my height, 5'6". Most were elderly, but they had creamy, milk chocolate skin, which appeared soft and healthy. I saw no one with long hair. Most of it was curly and closely cropped to their scalp. One very old, white-haired lady near the entrance had a garland of flowers painted around her neck and ankles. I saw no babies or young children, only one teenage boy. My eyes were drawn to the most elaborately attired person in the room, a man, his black hair flecked with gray. His trim beard accented the strength and the dignity of his face. On his head was a stunning full headdress made of bright parrot feathers. He too wore feathers on his arms and ankles. There were several objects strapped around his waist. He wore a circular, intricately carved chest plate made from bone and seeds. Several of the women had smaller, similar versions worn as necklaces. He smiled and held out both hands to me. As I looked into his black velvet eyes, I had a feeling of complete peace and security. I think he had the most gentle face I have ever witnessed. My emotions, however, were stretched in straining opposition. The painted faces and the men standing around the back, clutching razor-sharp spears, supported my growing sense of fear. Yet everyone wore a pleasant expression, and the atmosphere seemed to release an aroma of nourishing comfort and friendship. I settled emotionally midstream by judging my own stupidity. This did not resemble even a token of what I had expected. Never in a dream could I have invented such a threatening atmosphere holding so many seemingly gentle people. If only my camera weren't engulfed in flames outside this shack, what great photos I could paste in an album or show as slides to some future captive audience of relatives or friends. My thoughts returned to the fire. What else was burning up? I shuddered at the thought. My international driver's permit? Orange Australian paper money? The $100 bill I had carried for years in a secret compartment of my wallet. A favorite tube of creamy lipstick, unattainable in this country. My diamond watch, and the ring Aunt Nola gave me for my 18th birthday were all fueling the fire. The anxiety was interrupted as I was introduced to the group by the interpreter. His name was Uta. The brotherly man with the incredible eyes was referred to by the Aboriginals as tribal elder. He was not the oldest male in the group, but more like our definition of a chief. One woman began clicking sticks together and was soon joined by another and another. The spear-bearers began thumping the tall shafts in the sand, and still others were clapping hands. The whole group began to sing and chant. By hand gesture, they invited me to sit down upon the sandy floor. The group were putting on a festival, a corroboree. At the conclusion of one song, another would begin. I hadn't noticed before that some of the people had anklet bracelets that were made out of large pods, but now they became focal points as the encased dried seeds began pulsating rattles. At one point there was a single female dancer and then a group. Sometimes the men danced alone, and at other times women joined them. They were sharing their history with me. Finally, the tempo of the music slowed. The movements wound down to a much slower pace, and then all the movement ceased. Only a very steady beat, one that seemed synchronized to the pulse of my heart, remained. All of the people were silent and still. They looked toward their leader. He stood up and walked to me. Smilingly, he stood before me. There was an indescribable sense of communion. I had the intuitive feeling we were old friends, but of course that wasn't true. I guessed his presence just made me feel comfortable and accepted. The elder took off a long leather tube of platypus hide strapped to his waist, and he shook it at the sky. He opened the end, and he threw the contents out onto the ground. There were rocks, bones, teeth, feathers, and round leather discs laying all around me. Several members of the tribe helped mark where each item had landed. Then they put the items back into the case. The elder said something, and he handed it to me. I was reminded of Las Vegas, so I too held the tube up in the air and shook it. I repeated the game by opening the end and throwing the contents, feeling absolutely no control over where each landed. Two men on hands and knees measured where my items had fallen in comparison to the elders. A few comments were passed around among several people, but Uta didn't offer to tell me what was being said. A young woman came to me holding a plate full of rocks. It was probably a large piece of cardboard rather than a plate, but it was piled so high with stones that I couldn't see the container. Uta looked at me very seriously and said, "Choose a rock. Choose it wisely. It has the power to save your life." Goosebumps appeared instantly, although my limbs were hot and sweaty, and I looked at the rocks. They all looked alike. There was nothing outstanding about any of them. They were simply gray, red pebbles about the size of a nickel or a quarter. I wished that something would glow and look special. No luck. So I faked it. I looked intently as if I were studying them seriously, and then I selected one from the top and I held it up triumphantly. and the faces surrounding me beamed in approval, and in mental silence I rejoiced. I got the right rock. But what should I do with it? I couldn't drop it and hurt their feelings. After all, this stone meant nothing to me, but it seemed important to them. I had no pocket to put it in, so I stuck it down the front of my current covering in the chest cleavage, which was the only place that I could think to put it, and I promptly forgot the contents that were secured in nature's pocket. Next they put out the fire. They dismantled the instruments and they gathered up their few possessions, and they started walking out into the desert. Their brown, nearly naked torsos were sparkling in the bright sun as they filed into journey position. It seemed the meeting was over. No lunch, no award. Uta was the last to leave, and he was walking away. After several yards, he turned and said, "Come now, we are leaving." "Where are we going?" I inquired. "On a walkabout." "Where are you walking to?" "Across Australia." "Great. How long will that take?" "Approximately 3 full changes of the moon." "Are you saying walk for 3 months?" "Yes, 3 months more or less." I took a deep sigh. Then I announced to Uta as he stood in the distance, "Well, that sounds like a lot of fun, but you see, I can't go. Today's just not a good day for me to leave. I have responsibilities, obligations, rent, utility bills. I've made no preparation. I would need time to make arrangements before I could take off on a hike or a camping trip. Perhaps you don't understand. I am not an Australian citizen. I am American. We can't just go to a foreign country and disappear. Your immigration officials would be upset, and my government would send out helicopters looking for me. Maybe some other time, when I've had plenty of advance warning, then I could join you, but not today. I just can't go with you today. No, today is just not a good day." Uta smiled. "All is in order. Everyone will know who needs to know. My people heard your cry for help. If anyone in this tribe had voted against you, they would not walk this journey. You have been tested and accepted. The extreme honor I cannot explain. You must live the experience. It is the most important thing you will do in this lifetime. It is what you were born to do. Divine oneness is at work. It is your message. I can tell you no more. Come, follow." He turned and walked away. I stood there staring out across the Australian desert. It was vast, desolate, and yet beautiful, and it seemed to go on and on and on. The Jeep was there. Ignition key was in it. But which way had we come? There had been no road for hours, only endless twisting and turning. I had no shoes, no water, no food. The temperature at this time of year in the desert ranges between 100 and 130 degrees. I was glad they had voted to accept me, but what about my vote? It seemed to me the decision was not in my hands. I didn't want to go. They were asking me to put my life in their hands. These were people I had just met and with whom I couldn't even talk. What if I lost my employment position? It was insane. Of course I couldn't go. I thought, I'll bet this is a 2-part deal. First they play games here in this shack, and then they go out into the desert and play some more. They aren't going very far. They don't have any food. The worst thing that could happen to me would be expecting me to spend the night out there. But no, I thought, they could take one look at me and see I'm not a camper. I'm a city bubble bath type. But I thought, I can do it if I have to. I will simply be assertive. Since I've already paid for one night at the hotel, I will tell them they must return me before checkout tomorrow. I'm not going to pay for another day just to satisfy these silly, uneducated folks. I watched the group walking farther and farther away and appearing smaller and smaller. I didn't have time for my Libra method of weighing advantages and disadvantages. The longer I stood there thinking about what to do, the farther out of sight they were becoming. with feelings that were rapidly ping-ponging between fear, amazement, disbelief, and sheer numbness. I began to follow the tribe of Aborigines who call themselves the real people. I wasn't bound and gagged, but I felt like a captive. To me, it appeared I was the victim of a forced march into the unknown. I had walked only a short distance when I felt stabbing pain in my feet, and I looked down to see barbs protruding from my skin. I pulled out the piercing thorns only to find that each time I took a step, more re-entered. I tried to hop on one foot in a forward pace and extract the painful sticker from the other at the same time. It must have appeared comical to the members of the group who turned to look back. Their smiles were now full grins. Uta had stopped to wait for me, and his facial expression appeared more sympathetic as he said, "Forget the pain. Remove the thorns when we camp. Learn to endure. Focus your attention elsewhere. We will help your feet later. You can do nothing now." It was his words, "focus your attention elsewhere," that were significant to me. I have worked with hundreds of people in pain, especially in the last 15 years as a doctor specializing in acupuncture. Often in terminal situations, the person must decide between some drug that renders them unconscious or the use of acupuncture. And included in my house call educational program, I've used those exact words. I have expected my patients to be able to do it, and now someone was expecting it of me. It was easier said than done, but I managed. After a while, we stopped to rest for a few moments, and I found most of the tips had broken off. The cuts were bleeding, and the splinters were embedded under my skin. We were walking on spinifex. It is what the botanists refer to as beach grass, binding to the sand and surviving where there is little water by developing rolled, steak knife-sharp blades. The word grass is very deceiving. This stuff doesn't resemble any grass to which I could relate. Not only were the blades cutting, but the barbs in them are like cactus tips. When they entered my skin, they left a stinging, swollen red irritation. I didn't dare fall. It was like a field of barbed wire. My soles were not nearly prepared for the abuse ahead. Pain continued, and blood in all shades from bright red to dark brown appeared at the surface of my feet, even though I was trying to put my attention elsewhere. And looking down, I could no longer distinguish the ragged polish that was on my toenails from the red color of the blood. Finally, my feet became numb. We walked in complete silence. It seemed very strange. No one was talking at all. The sand was warm, not beastly hot. The sun was hot, but not unbearable. Periodically, the world seemed to take pity on me and provide a brief breeze of cooler air. As I looked ahead of the group, there seemed to be no clearly defined line between the earth and the sky. Without warning, the whole column of people stopped walking forward and turned off on an angle. It surprised me. I heard no words directing us to change course. Everyone seemed to sense it except me. I thought perhaps they had this trail down pat, but it was obvious we were not following a path in the sand and the spinifex. We were wandering in the desert. My head was a whirl of thoughts. Was this really happening? Maybe it's a dream. They had said walk across Australia. That isn't possible. Walk for months? That isn't reasonable either. They heard my cry for help? What did that mean? This is something I was born to do? What a joke. It wasn't my life's ambition to suffer exploring the outback. I was worried about the concern my disappearance would cause my children, especially my daughter. We were very close. At that point, I couldn't believe we were going to be gone for more than a day at the most. After all, there was nothing to eat or drink in sight. And I laughed aloud. A private joke. How many times I had said I wanted to win an exotic, all-expense-paid trip. Here it was. All provisions were supplied. I didn't even have to pack a toothbrush or a change of clothes. As the day wore on, there were so many cuts on the sides and the bottom of my feet that the slits and the hardened blood and the swollen circles combined into an ugly, numb, discolored extremity. My legs were stiff, my shoulders burned and aching, my face and arms were red and raw. We walked about 3 hours that day. The limitations of my endurance were expanded over and over. Finally, it was time to stop for the night. Everyone was immediately busy. A fire was lit, using not matches, but by twirling a stick in a slotted groove to spark a fire. Some gathered firewood and others gathered plants. 2 men had been jointly sharing a load all afternoon. They had a colorless cloth draped across 2 long spears and made into a pouch. It held contents that bulged like giant marbles as we walked. Now they sat it down and removed several items. A very old woman approached me. She looked as old as my grandmother, in her 90s. Her hair was snowy white. Soft, folded wrinkles filled her face. Her body appeared to be lean, strong, and smoothly supple, but her feet were so dry and hard they had developed into almost a sort of animal hoof. She took off a little snakeskin pouch tied to her waist. She poured something that looked like discolored Vaseline into the palm of her hands. I learned it was a leaf oil mixture. She pointed to my feet and I nodded in agreement for help. She sat in front of me, took my feet into her lap, rubbed the ointment onto my swollen sores, and sang a song. It was a soothing melody, almost like a mother's lullaby for a babe. I asked Uta what the words meant. She is apologizing to your feet. She is telling them how much you appreciate them. She is telling how much everyone in this group appreciates your feet. And she is asking your feet to get well and strong. She makes special sounds for healing wounds and cuts. She also tones sounds that draw out the swelling fluids. She asks that your feet become very strong and tough. It wasn't my imagination. The burning, stinging, raw sores really did begin to ease, and I felt gradual relief. As I sat with my feet in this grandmotherly lap, I began mentally to challenge the reality of today's experience. The incredible healing oil mixture, made from heating leaves and removing the oil residue, was working. My feet finally felt relieved enough that courage to stand once again entered my thoughts. Off to the right was a group of women who seemed to have an assembly line project underway. They were gathering large leaves, while one woman poked into the brush and dead trees with a long digging stick. Another removed something and put it on the leaf. Then a second leaf topped the contents and was folded. So the final package was given to a runner who in turn took it to the fire and buried it in the coals. I was curious. This was our first meal together, the menu I had wondered about for weeks. I hobbled over for a closer view and couldn't believe my eyes. The scooped hand held a large, white, crawling worm. I took another deep sigh. I had lost track of the number of times today when I was left speechless, but one thing was for certain. I knew I would never be so hungry I would eat a worm. At that moment, however, I was learning a lesson. Never say never. It wasn't long before the folded leaf casseroles were removed from the charcoals, and mine was handed with the devotion of a special duty nurse. I watched everyone open theirs and eat the contents with their fingers. My handheld banquet was warm, but there was no movement, so I became brave enough to look inside. The grubworm had disappeared. At least it didn't look like a worm any longer. It was now a brown, crumbly bed, resembling roasted peanuts or pork rind. And I thought to myself, "I can handle this." I did, and it tasted good. I didn't know that cooking, certainly cooking things beyond recognition, was being done for me and was not a common practice. That night it was explained to me that my work with the urban-dwelling Aborigines had been reported. Even though these young adults were not full-blooded natives and did not belong to this tribe, my work was a display of someone who truly seemed to care. The summons came because it appeared to them I was crying for help. I was found to have pure intent. The problem was that as they saw it, I did not understand the Aborigine culture, and certainly not the code of this tribe. The ceremonies performed earlier in the day were tests. I was found acceptable and worthy of learning the knowledge of the true relationship of humans to the world we live in, the world beyond, and the dimension from which we came and the dimension where we shall return. I was going to be exposed to the understanding of my own beingness. As I sat, my soothed feet now encased in their precious and limited supply of leaves, Uta explained what a tremendous undertaking it was for these natives to walk with me. I was being allowed to share their life. Never before had they associated with a white person or even considered any kind of relationship with one. In fact, they have avoided it for all time. According to them, every other tribe in Australia had submitted to the rules of the white government. They were the last of the holdouts. They usually travel in small families of 3 to 6 people, but had come together for this event. Uta pointed to me, and he spoke to each person, pronouncing the same word repeatedly. I thought they were trying to say my first name, and then decided, no, they are instead going to call me by my last name. But it wasn't either. The word they used that night, and the name I continued to carry for the journey, was mutant. I did not understand why Uta, who was the spokesperson for both languages, was teaching them to say such a strange term. Mutant, to me, meant some significant change in basic structure, resulting in a form of mutation, no longer like the original. But actually it didn't really matter, for at that point my whole life was in total confusion. We shared in a communal bag of Aboriginal stone tea. It was made by dropping hot rocks into a container of precious water. The container had originally served as bladder for some animal. Wild herbs were added to the heated water and left to steep toward perfection. We passed the unique vessel around the group back and forth. It tasted wonderful. The people then began to smooth out places in the sand, and each took from the common bundle carried earlier a round roll of hide or skin. An older woman handed me my pack. Her name was Sewing Master. "It's dingo," Uta advised. I knew the dingo was Australia's wild dog, similar to our coyote or wolf. It's very versatile. You can put it under you on the ground, or cover yourself, or comfort your head. Great, I thought. I can select which 24 inches of my body I want to comfort. Someplace down deep, I was really grateful for learning more about how other people live, and I was beginning to see that more than blood passes through the human heart. I closed my eyes and I said a silent thank you to the power above. Someone at the far side of the camp said something, and it was repeated by first one and then another. They were passing it along, each one saying the same phrase, crisscrossing from one reclining figure to another. Finally, the phrase was given to Uta, whose sleeping mat was the closest to mine. He turned and said, "You are welcome. This day is good." Somewhat startled at their answer, at my unvoiced words, I responded by saying my thank you and you're welcome the second time, aloud. I was awakened in the morning before any exposure to sun rays by the noise from people gathering up their few scattered articles they had used the evening before. I was told the days gained in heat, so we would walk during the cooler morning hours, rest, and then resume our journey into the late night. I folded the dingo hide and handed it to the man who was packing. The hides were left easily accessible because during the peak hours of the day we would build a shelter, build a wilcha, or a temporary brush shelter, and use our sleeping skins to construct shade. Most of the animals do not like the glaring sun. Only the lizards, spiders, and bush flies are alert and active at 100+ degrees. Even snakes must bury themselves in extreme heat, or they become dehydrated and die. It is hard sometimes to spot snakes as they hear us coming and peek their heads out of the sandy soil to find the source of the vibration. I am grateful at the time I was not aware there are 200 different types of snakes in Australia, and over 70 are poisonous. I did learn that day, however, the remarkable relationship the Aborigines have with nature. Before we started walking for the day, we formed a close-knit semicircle, all of us facing the east. The tribal elder moved to the center and started chanting. A beat was established and carried there by each person clapping their hands, stomping their feet, or hitting their thighs. It lasted about 15 minutes. This was routine each morning, and I discovered it was a very important part of our life together. It was morning prayer, centering, goal setting, whatever you would want to call it. These people believe everything exists on the planet for a reason. Everything has a purpose. There are no freaks, misfits, or accidents. There are only misunderstandings and mysteries, not yet revealed to mortal man. The purpose of the plant kingdom is to feed animals and humans, to hold the soil together, to enhance beauty, to balance the atmosphere. I was told the plants and trees sing to we humans, silently, and that all they ask in return is for us to sing to them. My scientific mind immediately translated this to mean nature's oxygen, carbon dioxide exchange. The primary purpose of the animal is not to feed man, but it agrees to that when necessary. It is to balance the atmosphere, to be companion and teacher by example, and occasionally help with work. So each morning the tribe sends out a thought or a message to the animals and the plants in front of us. They say, "We are walking your way. We are coming to honor whatever is out there for your purpose for being." It is up to the plants and animals to make their own arrangement about who will be chosen. The Real People tribe never go without food. Always the universe responds to their mind talk. They believe the world is a place of abundance. Just as you and I might gather to listen to someone play the piano and honor their talent and purpose, they sincerely do the same thing with everything in nature. When a snake appeared on our path, it was obviously there to provide our dinner. The daily food was a very important part of our evening celebration. I learned that the appearance of food was not taken for granted. It was first requested, always expected to appear, and did appear, but was gratefully received, and genuine gratitude was always given. I tried to tell Uda it was time for him to take me back to the Jeep, but it seemed he was nowhere in sight. Finally, I acknowledged I could endure one more day. The tribe carries no provisions. They've planted no crops. They participate in no harvest. They walked the blazing Australian outback, knowing each day they would receive bountiful blessings of the universe. The universe never disappointed them. This is the end of Side 1.